So hello everyone, good morning, and welcome to this keynote. It's growing the intangibles, and we believe that this is what every tech business should do. Now, this talk is going to be an emphasis on aspects of business that are easy to forget or get taken for granted, but are incredibly important for a technology business in its path to success. I'm Barsha Panda. I'm the founder and CEO of Dark Street. It's a business consulting practice. I started this after almost 2 decades of working with technology MNCs in Singapore, in the US, and in Europe. Today, I work with CEOs, CXOs, and division heads of startups and enterprises to basically on their business strategy, on leadership effectiveness, on culture and organization build. We work on strategies to sustain and scale for distributed organizations and how to make organizations really agile to both internal and external realities in a very everyday, in a real impact way. What I share with them, the advice I give them is what I will be sharing with you today, and that is the power of the intangibles and how to treat them, and really the need to treat them as strategic investments. So before we go there, just a quick one, a stop at a conversation and a question that probably happens everywhere we go. Even if you're not in the technology business, you end up saying, what's your favorite tech trend today? And why today? Because tech is moving so fast. Tomorrow, your favorite tech trend could be a different one. And most of what we will end up answering is somewhere, I suppose, in these or extensions of these, right? The metaverse, immersive experiences, but also business applications for high-value sales, for education, autonomous, self-driving cars, shipping, logistics, last-mile delivery, digital twins, and the lot. Cloud, of course, cloud now sounds like a oldie but a goodie because it's been there for a little longer than the others. But yeah, SaaS solutions, digital transformation, low-code and low-ops, new ways of building applications, new ways of leaning out your DevOps teams, robotics, precision manufacturing to tech-enabled agriculture. I mean, it's kind of pervasive all through. Blockchain, of course, there's crypto, but also smart contracts, also its close cousin with NFTs in art, right? Generative AI, I'm not going to talk about this because we all have our favorite generative AI tool to play with. And 3D and 4D printing, that is slowly making its way out from scientific laboratories and maker studios into the consumer market. Now, each of these, if you look at them, they are very different technologies, and they all have world-changing implications. And yet, they have something in common, something fundamentally in common. And what they have in common is that they're extremely democratized. They're easily accessible and available to all competing businesses. Now, this is great news for users. It always has been, and that is how the largest technology platforms that we know of have grown. But when you think of it from a business standpoint, one which has to survive, grow, outgrow competition, sharing an advantage with everyone isn't really an advantage to have. So, and if you're a business that's, say, making and selling technology, you would want a moat around you for longer before your competitors can put up their hands and offer similar offerings. If you're a business that's investing in order to have a strategic edge over competitors, you would want a longer runway to enjoy that edge for longer. And I think the way this is going is that we have businesses now building on top of these platforms to sort of create but short-lived differentiation, right? So to summarize this in the context of technology businesses in general, and as I think McKinsey said, all businesses are turning into technology businesses today. It comes down to this: when everyone has access to the same technology, who has the real advantage? So the hypothesis of this is not that there is no advantage, but who has the real advantage? And the whole point of having access to same technology and thereby there being parity, the problems are quite obvious and manifest today. Most startups are working on something that somebody else is. And it's not probabilistically. Large sets of startups are working on the same tracks. It's a race to the finish to see who gets there faster. And as a result, market expansion and market capture is becoming the greatest play. And that's not a tech game, if you think about it. That's one differently than a tech game. The third thing you look at is look at when you recruit people or when you talk to your customers. How quickly the conversation moves to the money factor, not the value factor. So clearly there's a need for technology companies to differentiate beyond their technology, beyond their product, services, and offerings. And the fact is, if you look at the most popular search engine today, is it the best search engine? If we look at, I don't expect you to answer that question. We don't want to get there, right? But or if we look at the most popular phone, is it the best performing phone? The fact is we don't know. And we don't know, and big technology companies, the way they become hugely successful is because their value amplification and value preservation and extending that advantage, it happens because of differentiating factors in the technology itself, right? And the way they actually capture and mostly extend the advantage for long is because of a few intangibles. Now, intangibles in business is an interesting point, right? Tech is so much about data and visible architecture and all of it. But the intangibles are several. But if we abstract them out, three emerge as the key heroes. And I'd go so far as to call them the intangible trinity. Bear with me for a second. Do not think, hey, we know culture, we know leadership, maybe we know story. Bear with me because there's an interesting nuance coming up as to why it makes a difference. Now, this intangible trinity, which is culture, leadership, and story, in some sense, if you look at, think of any successful value technology company today. We potentially love them for how they build stuff, how they're leading humanity into the future, and how they land this story into our minds and make us believe it. Yeah? So these three, culture, leadership, and story, are almost gravity-like because they are very hard to define. They're very hard to define. They're even harder to measure objectively, and yet they exert a very obvious power, and their effect is very clear. So it wouldn't be wrong to frankly call them like a time-space kind of a mesh that exerts power by playing on the mindsets of the market. Because most valued technology companies today, they create a myth. Myth is not a bad word, by the way. Myth is what gets into our minds. It stays with us. It's belief. And that myth that they create happens on the basis of this and beyond what their core offering is. To make a point, I think if you get the intangible trinity, if you harness this power, your surface area of potential success goes up exponentially. And as I said, bear with me because these are not as simple as, these words are not new to business. I mean, of course we know culture, of course we know leadership, we know story too. But the point is, have you deconstructed them specifically to technology? Because technology is a different beast. More importantly, it's not a beast that looks at linear growth, which marks it very differently from any other industry that exists, right? The second thing is that do your strategic investments show that you believe in them? These are not nice to have, these are not good to have, these are not extras to have. Do you have strategic investment in that? So in the next few minutes, we have maybe about 18 minutes, let me walk you through some brief deconstructions of each of these and the top 2 or 3 points to remember or to measure yourself against when you get into building these or applying this. Let's start with deconstructing culture. Some of the most admired people in technology, they have pointed out the value of culture. So just to take you back a little in time, it was Lou Gerstner, the IBM CEO, the legendary CEO of IBM really, and who taught the world, right, that you can teach an elephant to dance. He talked about it. Satya Nadella, much more in fresh memory, totally took the company into a totally different future than what probably any of us expected. And Peter Thiel. Now, Peter Thiel's comment is very interesting. He says, don't mess up the culture. You don't expect it to come from a TL's personality, right? You expect him to be all about hard numbers and technology, and that's the miracle. He says, don't mess up the culture. I mean, Thiel being Thiel, he used a stronger word than mess up, but I'm sure it conveys the point about what he says, don't do that about the culture. And yet, why is it that technology companies, and I've been in several of them, some do better, some don't, I work now with startups a lot as well, so I see them as well. And you would expect them to have great culture because they've all come together apparently to build something, and 20 people, and they have huge issues with culture. And why is that? Why don't companies get into an effective culture? Because I think we need to take a more honest look at what culture is. It's how we work and how we actually work, not how we like to talk about ourselves or believe we would like to work. The second thing is that a lot of the times culture runs into this whole idealism and moralizing issue, right? They're good sounding things like plaques on wall, we build them as that. But culture in an organization is better understood if you think of it as a culture in a laboratory, in a petri dish, something that grows on its own if the conditions are right. And when something grows on its own, it evolves. And your conditions need to be kept right. And it changes if the conditions change, right? Which also means that culture, if it's going to be real, needs to be an open and evolving one, which interacts within itself and externally, and is allowed to change and evolve. Which brings us to the other aspect, that what gets passed off in the name of culture is also sometimes a bit of a rah-rah, of a frenzied belief in it, which is potentially as not true as a company saying, we absolutely believe in fairness and this and this and this, and yet they're extremely aggressive in the sales market, right? So it's the same problem when you look at it, whichever way you cast that. If we were to look at how can we thereby build an effective culture, let me just walk you through some important points, and we can get into this later. So Tony's here, God bless his soul, but he said something very interesting. It's not that companies don't have core values, it is that they don't commit to it. So culture is always a question of a clarity of your choice and your ability to commit to it. So when you define a culture, do you pick it for long-term financial viability of your company, or are you taking a good-to-have approach? And when I say long-term financial viability, I mean that is it reflective of how you want to operate now and how you want to operate to get to wherever you want to get to? And it sounds pretty commonsensical. Of course it is that, but it isn't, because think about it. All technology companies swear by innovation, but the truth is, in a business cycle, there's time for innovation and there's time for value capture, there's time for targeted sales. And the cultures of these are going to be incredibly different. It's the same conditions won't lead to that, right? The second one is, say, faster shipping cycles versus fun at work. So there's a whole expectation of technology as a culture, right, which is a lot like the WeWork offices, the Friday fests, the pizza parties, and a lot of beautiful lighting, open systems of work and stuff. And here's the thing, though. Can you be bold enough to consider, does this correlate to my actual goals? Because if I'm trying to ship faster, isn't an environment that allows for deep work and more close-knit work between smaller units of my setup more conducive to that than a constant state of connectedness? I'm not saying connectedness is not great, but do that when you have a sales party. But the point is, what does the culture that we are signing up to committing to actually do for us? The third thing, and this is an interesting one, right? They have it. So a lot of the times, culture builders in many organizations, they look at what they like outside, they look at what's working for people, and they tend to bring that in. Now, this process of benchmarking and reverse engineering is great for products and services, but with culture, what happens is that when it's not native to you, it sits like a film on top of things that are more real. It never really takes. So it's a lot better to start culture from a perspective of who are we today, how do we actually work, how do we need to work, and build it as a function of that rather than they have it and they don't. It's the same thing as when corporates say, right, we are the world's largest startup. I mean, their decision-making matrix doesn't allow them to be a startup. Or when startups want to retain the culture they had earlier to say, processes are for dodos. No, they're not. When you were only doing product development, the messy, tangled web leading to innovation was great. You got customers, you got logistics, you got customer service. Your culture now needs to become far more organized. So the thing of they have it, so we should have it, they have it, so we don't want it, neither of it works. What's native to us and what will work for us is the most important consideration to have. The most powerful cultures are built on the concept, on a graph of or and not and, because ands are crutches. We want to be this and we want to be that as well, right? This line actually comes from Succession, if any of you are watching it. So the Roy kids, they try to make this pitch, okay? And they want to say, The startup we have in mind has got the ethics of a nonprofit at its core and a crazy path to profits. All of you guys in business, please tell me, is that even going to be possible? You know, you operate like a nonprofit and you have crazy path to profits. It's not, and it's easy to laugh at them, except that most of our businesses and cultures in businesses actually sound a bit like this. There's an and matrix that keeps governing. We are this, we are also this. It's not very helpful. When you ruthlessly prioritize what your culture is, you get to know who you are and who you are not. And then those both aspects work equally importantly. If we're going into deconstructing leaderships, clearly the tech CEOs are the rock stars of our time. Yeah? And the thing is, we all have our pet favorites and our not-so-favorites. The interesting thing is that our decision of that is probably based on personality traits rather than their leadership process. We are very far away. Also, it's a very rock star phenomena, right? It's easy to borrow the hairstyle and the fashion and not learn how to make music like they do, because we really don't know that. So that's one big aspect of tech leadership, because it makes tech leaders believe we need to have lightning speed decision making. We are the God particle phenomena, or to think that anything we do has to change things at a planet scale, which is not really the point of a business as well. And it doesn't have to be. It's okay if you're helping out 10 neighborhoods. It doesn't have to be anything beyond that. But that's the burden they carry. And the second thing is that leadership really calls for life experience, while technology requires you to probably be obsessed with technology itself from a very, very young age. So the two sit not quite close to each other, and building an organization, being a leader, requires you to have life experience, and you tend to snap back to what you're very good at, which is, I know technology, and I'm very good at that. The third is, you get into technology because you love doing cool stuff, right? And you love talking to a machine and building better and better instructions that returned you what you wanted from it. Think about doing that to human beings. That's not how an organization is going to get built, because you're not talking to machines. Well, at least not for the foreseeable future at this point in time. So if we were to look at making strategic investments in leadership, what would be the real job of a tech leader? The first part is that in tech leadership, you're not working on a role in the business, you're working on the business, especially people who are building up companies from ground up. People, product, process, wherever there's a gap, you're really responsible for that. So being present, being involved, being ungrudgingly involved in solving those problems is a part of the job. And it's a difficult one, but it is a part of the job. The second one is the difference between delivering to investors and delivering to customers. Now, even very large enterprises, they have issues with the quarterly race. I mean, we've heard so many of them say that it is the quarterly race of publishing something that's coming in the way of our long-term goals for the company. Now, it is very magnified in a startup kind of a context, right? And once you've taken investments, what happens is that you know for a fact as a leader that how your community of users and your customers are going to respond to you is more important. But you end up choosing to perform and deliver to the indices the investors project to you as, how do we know you're a healthy company? How do we know you're heading in the right direction? Now that creates a big conflict. And the best companies we have seen deliver really well to the world, the leaders there are able to convince and persuade the investors why the response coming from the community and the customers is more important than existing performance indices of, are we doing well or not? So that job of convincing is a very big part of a tech leader's, frankly, job description. The third thing is coming into, in fact, investors and customers. Jason Fried, who's the founder of Basecamp, made a very strong point. He said, you quit your job to start a company, and then you start delivering to performance indices of your investor. You just took on the job with another company, just changed your ID card. And so that's an important thing to remember. It's not easy, but it's a line to walk. The third is about people. Technology is, of course, a business of people, and truly, nobody really works for you. The way technology works is you're renting spaces in people's mind to solve problems that you have set them to solve. There is no way of pushing this, and it's not like an industrial setup or an automotive plant, right? There's no way to do this unless you earn that space in their minds. So a lot of times we hear this, right? Most valuable asset. It's well-intentioned, but there's a technical problem with this. Assets appreciate or depreciate in a linear way. People are spiky. The person who walks into your office today is not the person who walked into your office yesterday. They just have the same employee ID. Because people's minds and what's engaged with, they change too frequently for our ease as leaders, for sure, but it is the truth of what it is. So the extent to which leaders can ungrudgingly continue to say, how can I engage my people and persuade them? And not engagement is HR's job, but that's really not the point. How can you continue to earn a space in their mind saying the problems you're solving are incredibly important? This is why I'm reminding you why you're incredibly important. And do it ungrudgingly. That's not a stretch of your role, it is your role. And so, of course, please be rock stars, but be the real rock stars. Learn to make the music, and making music often involves very repetitive, boring aspects of work as well. So get comfortable with that, because that's what we love them for. Deconstructing story, this is really where the value and valuation of technology companies come from. A very conventional idea of story somewhere hovers around the idea of a brand. So it's like, we know brand, bells and whistles, or consistency of logos and stuff like that. But a brand idea is a very limited, that older way of thinking about it, it gives you very limited value. Because it's more like a consumer product company's play, really. Technology companies, the greatest of the brands, they have arrived into our minds via way of a story. So what's the difference there, right? Story is the position of this company of what their endeavor is, not their accomplishment. Their endeavor is, what are they trying to do in the larger narrative of human progress. And this is an interesting aspect, because the larger narratives could be, one could be AI is going to save humankind, AI is going to end it all, right? And you could have a story in either, but it plays into an existing aspiration of humanity and says, here's what we are going to do, because you already know that's the problem, or that is where the opportunity is. When you arrive at a brand value with a story, you're unlocking tremendous amount of not just respect, you're commanding a higher price, and you have a long tail of value creation. We've seen that. Apple's Creative Class ad, Google's entire Android VR for everyone kind of a revolution. They have given them long tail of value creation for many, many years. And Apple probably needs a new one today, but it has been able to get a lot out of that. And then if we look at technology and its troubles, right? When you have a strong story, it gives you a stronger air cover. It gives you a softer landing, whether it's a data privacy things, whether it's a matter of regulatory stuff, whether it's a matter of AI and what will be the ethics of AI and what comes in. You have a stronger story, you have a softer landing, and you have better air cover for it. And making strategic investments in story. So as I was talking about earlier, right, the story is a myth or a metaphor that we start to believe about a company, and the best ones appear to be accidental or natural, and they are not. They are always the product of a serious amount of strategic investments made by the executives, by the leadership, into the communities, and in time, effort, attention, and monies, of course. And this is a really large topic, so I'm just going to try and do 3 things here. The first is that we live really in a data-surrounded world. So the idea of impressions, how many impressions did we drive today, right? So it takes the focus into visibility, and the belief is the more dollars we spend, we can get more visibility and we can get our name out there. That's really not the point with a technology story-based brand, because when new people meet you, yes, you put in dollars and you drive visibility, more impressions, new people meet you. The impression they carry of you depends on the story they meet, and that story itself should stand very strong. So the conventional marketing would push more into impressions, but let's focus first on what is the impression, then we'll drive it up, because that's easier done than the story itself. No secret, technology stories and companies are always built within a community. That's your insider circle. And for the biggies, if you look at it, it was not that they couldn't reach the larger world. It was a strategic decision to reach through a trusted set of a world of belief. And there's a lot of care that goes into building a community and the response that comes from there. And the companies that do it well, An interesting point where we notice how have they done it well is there's a lot of outrage when they are acquired. Like when Figma got acquired, there's a lot of outrage because what happened in the community is like, hey, now this big corporate is not going to care for us as much as you did. But that's love for the story, right? Like right now, the Reddit issue that is happening. Reddit CEO believes that's a grown-up act, charging them. The community says, you're being dishonest because actually you grew because of us, right? So there's a tremendous amount of power and real story that is happening there. And community requires a lot of honest ways of telling the story, making believers out of them, and that's a powerful one. The third one is the brand as a line of business. Now, this is a very powerful thing which is very less used, where the brand or the story itself creates and delivers value without the product or the service. Yeah? So let's go back to that Apple, the change makers conversation we were having about Apple, right? So if you really look at what it does there is, they of course don't show the machines and stuff, but that's one part of it. The more interesting part of it, there are already misfits and outliers in the world who feel they don't belong because they're unconventional, right? So there's a beautiful story which says, yes, you are unconventional, but so was Mahatma Gandhi, so was Albert Einstein, so was this and so was that, and so are we. And you know, in that moment when you hear that and you see that, that feels good because if you felt like a misfit, you suddenly say, hey, I could be, but I'm in the same graph as them. This is not just a feeling. This is the making of belief. And when you identify with that, you suddenly say, I want to go with the unconventional company because they did not call me names for not fitting in. That is where a brand itself becomes a line of business. And for that to happen, you need to treat it like a line of business. So if a story was your product or service, how would you really build it? You wouldn't also leave it to 3 people in the organization, right? The leadership would get involved in it. I think we're almost done, but let me take 2 minutes and finish this off. The mind space is a real market. The faster we get to it, the faster we'll understand why story builds the most valuable brands. The mind space is a real market. The story is a real product or a service, but it's real. This brings me to the end of the deconstructions and what I said, the top 2 or 3 things about them. But I'll leave you with one thought, which I suppose is very powerful for all of us. Technology leads to business evolution, and that's true. But within the technology industry, if you look at it, we are always playing catch up with actually doing things for business, actually being able to implement it. Because between a conceptual solution and the real world solution, there's always a catch up that we are playing. If you harness these 3 intangibles, which is culture, leadership, and your story, you get to drive business cycles. And I think that's a powerful, powerful way to look at where technology could really, really make change in the world. Thank you very much. This has been lovely.